On the day of the long-awaited parent-child celebration, a poor girl is humiliated because she has no one to accompany her. In tears and mocked by her classmates, she meets a stranger in front of the school. Heartbroken, she looks at the millionaire in his expensive suit and asks, "Can you be my father for just one day today?" This unlikely request is the beginning of a story that no one there will ever forget. The Munich sky was gray and gloomy, just like the mood of little Louisa Weber as she walked through the front door of the elementary school near the English garden that morning. At 5 years old, with two braids that her mother Hannah lovingly tied every morning, she seemed more fragile than the other children in her class. Her worn school uniform, a gift from the neighborhood charity, made her seem even smaller among the children of the wealthy parents of northern Munich. "Louisa, hurry up or you'll be late." Hannah Weber, a slim, exhausted-looking woman in her late 20s, gave her daughter a gentle push toward the school entrance. "I have to go to work now. Mrs. Kohler is picking you up today." "Don't forget, I won't be home until late." Hannah worked as a cleaner in various buildings in the city center. In the mornings, she cleaned offices on Maximilianstrasse, and in the evenings, she cleaned the glass facades of the corporate headquarters in Arabella Park. Since Louisa's birth, she had been struggling alone after Louisa's father disappeared from her life upon hearing the news of her pregnancy. Louisa nodded silently and hugged her mother briefly before shuffling toward the classroom with her head down. The other parents' elegant limousines were parked in a row in front of the school, a daily reminder of the wealth gap in this part of Munich. Her classroom on the second floor offered a spectacular view of the English garden, but today she didn't notice the green splendor. "Good morning, children." Miss Schmidt, their homeroom teacher, greeted the students with a beaming smile. She was a young, energetic woman who had been teaching at the elementary school for 2 years. "Today I have an exciting announcement for all of you." Louisa sat down in her seat in the back row next to the window, where she was least noticeable. Felix Bauer, the son of a well-known banker, turned to her and whispered, "There's a hole in your sweater, Weber." His friend Sophie giggled quietly. "In 2 weeks, we will be holding our annual Father's Day," Miss Schmidt announced enthusiastically. "On this special day, all the fathers come to school and spend the morning with us. We'll play games, do crafts, and hold a little competition." Louisa's heart sank. Father-Child Day. She had heard about it when her classmates talked about it last year. Pictures of laughing children on their father's shoulders, proud men making paper airplanes with their sons and daughters, or competing in sack races. "Every child will receive a participation form that your fathers must sign," Miss Schmidt continued and began distributing the colorful forms. When she reached Louisa, she hesitated briefly, then smiled encouragingly and placed the paper on her desk anyway. The recess bell rang and the children rushed out into the schoolyard. Louisa stayed behind, staring at the bright yellow form with the cheerful cartoon characters on the edge. Father's Day was written in large letters at the top of the sheet, with an empty space below for her father's signature. Small groups quickly formed in the schoolyard. Louisa sat alone on a bench under the big chestnut tree and unpacked her modest breakfast. A roll with jam, lovingly wrapped in newspaper to save on plastic bags. "Hey, Weber." Felix approached Sophie, Marcus, and Tobias, all children from wealthy families, with his usual entourage. "What will your father do on Father-Child Day?" "Oh, wait." He dramatically put a finger to his lips. "You don't have one." The others giggled. Louisa stared at her roll, trying to hold back the burning tears that welled up in her eyes. "Maybe she can bring one of the homeless people from the park," Sophie whispered loud enough for Louisa to hear. "They probably smell like their clothes." "Weir doesn't have a da. Weber doesn't have a da," Felix began to sing, and the others joined in. The tears Louisa had so bravely held back now rolled uncontrollably down her cheeks. She grabbed her school bag and ran from the schoolyard through the main entrance and out onto the street. She just wanted to get away from the mocking voices, the pitying glances of the teachers, the yellow form that reminded her like a brand of her incompleteness. Out of breath, she finally stopped somewhere at the edge of the English garden. Tears blurred her vision and she wiped them away angrily. It wasn't fair. Why didn't she have a father like the other children? Why did she have to be alone on days like Father's Day? As her vision cleared, she noticed a large black Mercedes parked at the side of the road. Standing next to the car was a tall man in an elegant dark gray suit. He was talking on his phone, gesturing energetically and frowning. His short-cropped blonde hair and upright posture radiated authority. How Sexton Maximilian Berger, 32 years old and CEO of Berger Tech, one of Germany's most promising technology companies, was just finishing a phone call with his board of directors. The quarterly figures were excellent, but there were rumors of accounting irregularities that worried him. He glanced at his expensive wristwatch. His driver was late, and he had an important meeting in 20 minutes. He felt a slight tug on his sleeve and looked down in surprise. Standing in front of him was a little girl with tear-stained eyes and braided pigtails. Her school uniform was worn, and she was holding a crumpled yellow piece of paper in her hand. "Excuse me," Louisa said with a trembling voice, "but could you maybe be my dad for just one day?" Max stared at the girl in disbelief. Of all the things he had expected that morning, a delay by his driver, bad news from the stock market, a surprise call from a competitor, this was the last thing he had expected. "Excuse me?" he asked uncertainly if he had heard correctly. Louisa held out the yellow form to him. "We're having a father-child day at school," and her lower lip began to tremble. "I don't have a dad, and the other kids laugh at me." And I thought maybe her voice broke. Max stared at the form, then at the little girl with the hopeful, tear-filled eyes. Something in her gaze struck him deep inside, awakening memories of his own childhood in the Schwabing orphanage, of the lonely nights when he longed for a father who never came. Max stared at the business card in his hand. Elementary school at the English Garden, Father-Child Day, was written on it in colorful letters. Next to it lay the crumpled yellow form Lisa had given him yesterday before running back to school after he had agreed, much to his own surprise. "Mr. Berger, the board is waiting for you." His assistant, Miss Wagner, stood in the doorway of his spacious office on the top floor of the Berger Tech Tower in downtown Munich. "I'll be right there," he replied, slipping the card into his wallet. What was he thinking? Maximilian Berger, the cold-blooded businessman who bought and sold companies like other men bought ties, had promised to play the father for a stranger's child. During the board meeting, his thoughts kept wandering. He saw the girl's tear-filled eyes in front of him, heard her trembling voice. "I don't have a dad, and the other kids laugh at me." The words had touched something in him, something he thought he had long forgotten. Max had grown up in an orphanage after his mother died, giving birth to him and his father. Whoever that might have been, never showed up. With iron will, he had worked his way out of poverty, landed a scholarship at the Technical University of Munich, and founded his first startup at the age of 25. Now, 7 years later, he was a multimillionaire, but the lesson had stayed with him. The next morning, his Mercedes was parked in front of the elementary school. Max was wearing his best tailor-made suit and had even put on a tie with little spaceships on it. It was a spontaneous purchase the night before, which he hoped would appeal to children. "Good morning, sir." The young teacher at the entrance looked questioningly at her list. "Berger, Maximilian Berger. I'm here for Louisa Weber." The words sounded strange to his ears. The teacher looked up in surprise. "Louisa Weber. Oh, I didn't know." "Of course, come in, Mr. Berger. The children are in the gym." When Max entered the large room, he saw about 20 fathers with their children who were already standing together in small groups. Some were building paper constructions, others were practicing for a relay race. His eyes scanned the room and finally found Louisa, sitting alone on a bench, her small hands folded nervously in her lap. When she saw him, her eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment, she sat frozen, then she jumped up and ran toward him. However, she stopped a meter in front of him, suddenly shy and uncertain. "You really came," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. Max felt his throat tighten. "Of course I came, I promise. Oh, didn't I?" A radiant smile spread across Louisa's face, a smile that seemed to light up the whole room. She hesitantly reached for his hand. "Come on, Dad. We have to sign up for the relay." Dad. The word hit him like an electric shock. He had never heard anyone say it to him before. And even though it was part of their little charade, it felt strangely right. Max let Louisa lead him across the room, noticing the surprised looks from the other parents and children. "Mr. Berger, Mrs. Schmidt, Louisa's class teacher, came up to you. I'm delighted to meet you." Louisa never mentioned that she left the sentence unfinished. "I travel a lot on business," Max improvised, unsure how much Louisa had told the teacher. "But for such an important day, I'll make an exception, of course." Miss Schmidt smiled with relief. "That's wonderful. Our first activity is t-shirt painting. Each father-child pair designs a t-shirt on the theme of what connects us. Max and Louisa found a place at a long table full of paints and white t-shirts. Max felt completely out of place. His hands, accustomed to keyboards and touchscreens, suddenly seemed clumsy and large. "What should we paint?" he asked quietly. Louisa thought for a moment. "Stars," she said decisively. "Lots and lots of stars." "Stars?" She nodded seriously. "Mom says stars shine even on the darkest night, and they are never alone. There are always other stars around them." Max felt a lump in his throat. He picked up a brush and began painting golden stars on the white shirt. Louisa followed his example, her little hands carefully decorating each star with silver glitter dots. "Weber has a father." Max heard the whispered question from a Banta with blonde hair and an arrogant expression. "Yesterday she was crying because she doesn't have one." "He looks rich," replied a girl with braids. "Maybe she hired him." Max tensed, ready to reprimand the children, but Louisa placed a paint-smeared hand on his arm. "Just ignore them," she said with a wisdom far beyond her years. "Mama says some people are like dark clouds. They cover the sun for a moment, but they can never extinguish the light." Max looked at her in amazement. This little girl had more dignity and strength than he had expected. He smiled and continued painting. Each star was a small rebellion against the dark clouds in this child's life. After painting the t-shirts, it was time for the outdoor relay race. Max, who hadn't done any sports for years, except for the occasional round of golf with business partners, suddenly found himself in a potato sack ready to hop. "On your marks, get set, go," called Mrs. Schmidt, and the fathers started hopping awkwardly in their sacks, while the children cheered and laughed. Max took 3 hops before losing his balance and falling spectacularly to the ground, letting out a loud "ouch." The other fathers laughed good-naturedly, but it was Louisa's resounding laughter that surprised him the most. It was the first time he had ever heard her really laugh. It was a bright, cheerful sound that warmed his heart in an inexplicable way. "You have to keep your legs together, Dad," she called, still giggling as she helped him up. "Like a penguin." "A penguin? Max grinned and tried again, this time with more success. They finished in last place, but Luisa's shining eyes made up for any embarrassment. The relay race was followed by a puzzle competition in which each pair had to put together a complicated picture. Max excelled here, his analytical mind quickly recognizing patterns and Luisa's nimble fingers placing the pieces exactly where he needed them. They came in second, narrowly beaten by the Mueller family's father-son team. "That was incredible, Dad." Louisa jumped up and down excitedly. "We almost won." "Dad," there was that word again, which made his heart contract strangely. He knew it was just a game, an illusion for a day. Tomorrow he would be Maximilian Berger again, the lonely CEO, and Louisa would go back to her world without a father. Surprisingly, the thought caused him pain. At the end of the day, all the pairs gathered in a circle, and each child was asked to say something about their father. Max froze. What would Louisa say? They had barely known each other for a day. When it was Louisa's turn, she stood up and beamed at the group. "My dad is very tall and very smart. He can solve puzzles very quickly, but he's not very good at jumping." The other children giggled and Max felt himself blushing. "But that's okay because he draws the best stars and because he's there, even when it's hard." She turned to him, her eyes full of trust and something Max couldn't name. "Thank you, Dad, for coming today." After the official end of the day, they stood in front of the school. Louisa proudly wore her self-painted t-shirt over her uniform and held a certificate of participation in her hand. So Max began awkwardly, unsure of how to say goodbye. "Will you come back next Saturday?" The question came so suddenly that Max needed a moment to process it. Louisa nodded seriously again. "Mom always works on Saturdays and I'm with Mrs. Kohler, but maybe you could pick me up. We could go to the zoo or the museum or just get ice cream." Max knew he should refuse. This had been a one-time thing, a day of mercy for a lonely child. But when he looked into Louisa's hopeful eyes, he couldn't help himself. "I'll see what I can do," he heard himself say. The first Saturday came faster than Max had expected. He stood nervously in front of the small apartment building in Neuhausen, a modest neighborhood northwest of downtown Munich. Louisa had written the address on a piece of paper and slipped it to him after Father's Day. Mrs. Kohler lives on the ground floor, apartment 1A. He had spent the whole Friday wondering if he should really come. Several times he had canceled the trip in his head, imagining how he would call Louisa, but he didn't have her phone number, so now he was standing there in jeans and a sweater instead of his usual suit, with a small plush star in his pocket, a spontaneous reference to the t-shirt they had painted together. The door was opened by an elderly woman with a friendly face. "You must be Mr. Berger," she said with a knowing smile. "Louisa has been talking about nothing else in all morning. Come in." Louisa was sitting at the kitchen table painting. When she saw Max, she jumped up, her face beaming with joy. "You really came?" "Of course," Max replied, strangely moved by her surprise. "I promised, didn't I?" While Louisa went to get her jacket, Mrs. Kohler turned to him in a hushed voice. "It's nice to see you making time for her. Hannah works so hard, and the little one really needs a male role model." Her eyes became questioning. "Forgive my directness, but are you a friend of the family?" Max replied quickly, unsure how to explain his relationship with Louisa. "Louisa's mother and I know each other from before." Mrs. Kohler nodded, but didn't seem entirely convinced. "Well, Hannah usually picks her up at 6. If you're late, I'll be here." The Munich Zoo was busy on this spring day. Louisa skipped excitedly beside Max, her little hand firmly in his. It was a strange feeling for him. He couldn't remember the last time he had held someone's hand, let alone a child's. "What's your favorite animal?" he asked as they reached the elephant enclosure. Louisa tilted her head and thought seriously. "Tigers," she decided. "They look dangerous, but they're actually just lonely. At least that's what the man on TV said." Max smiled. "Then we should visit the tigers." They stood in front of the tiger enclosure for a long time. The mighty Siberian tiger paced majestically back and forth behind the safety glass, his gaze cool and alert. "He looks like you," Louisa said. "Suddenly like me." She nodded seriously, big and strong and a little grumpy but not really angry. Max laughed in surprise. "Am I grumpy?" "Sometimes," Louisa replied honestly. "When you think no one is looking at you, that's how you look." She furrowed her eyebrows and put on a serious, almost grim expression. Max was amazed at her powers of observation. He knew that he was often described as aloof and cool. Some of his colleagues called him the iceberg behind his back. But if a 5-year-old child could see through this mask so easily, "Maybe you're right," he admitted. "But you know what? I'm not grumpy today because we're together. That's exactly why." After the zoo, they went to a small cafe nearby. Louisa ordered a hot chocolate with extra cream and a chocolate cake, which she looked at with wide eyes. "Can I really have the whole cake?" "Of course," Max replied. "It's Saturday. Saturdays are for cake." "Mama says that sometimes too," Louisa said, as she carefully spooned the cream off her hot chocolate. "But most of the time she's too tired to bake. She works a lot." "What does your mother do?" Max asked suddenly, curious about the woman who raised this extraordinary child. "She cleans offices," Louisa replied without shame. "Mornings and evenings, and sometimes on weekends, in big buildings with lots of windows." Max nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like hard work." "It is. That's why she often has back pain and tired hands." Louisa looked up at him. "What do you do at work? Do you play there sometimes too?" Max didn't really smile. "I run a company that makes computers and programs. I spend most of my time in meetings and reading lots of documents." "That sounds boring," Louisa said with childlike directness. "Sometimes it is," Max admitted, surprised by his own honesty. When was the last time he had thought about his work? Not in terms of profit and loss, but whether it gave him pleasure. As the afternoon drew to a close, Max took Louisa back to Mrs. Kohler's apartment. On the way home, she had become quiet, her energy from the morning spent. "Thank you for the lovely day," she finally said, as they stood in front of the house. "It was the best Saturday I've had in a long time." "For me too," Max replied, surprised at how sincerely he meant it. "Will you come back next Saturday?" Her voice was soft, almost fearful, as if she was afraid of the answer. And although a voice in his head told him that he was getting too involved, that this was not his life, not his family, he heard himself say, "I'll be back. Promise." In the weeks that followed, Saturdays with Louisa became an integral part of Max's life. They visited the Deutsches Museum, where Louisa explored the science and technology exhibitions with amazement. They went to the planetarium, where they sat hand in hand under the artificial starry sky, and Louisa whispered the names of the constellations she had learned in a book from the school library. One Saturday, while they were having a picnic in the English garden, Louisa asked out of the blue, "Do you have a dad too?" The question caught Max off guard. He put his sandwich aside and thought about how to answer. "No," he finally said. "I grew up in a home. It's a place for children who don't have parents." Louisa's eyes widened. "You didn't have a mom or dad at all?" "No. Were there other children?" "How many? Did you play together? Was it lonely sometimes?" The questions bubbled out of her. Max smiled gently. "There were many other children. We played and learned together. And yes, sometimes it was lonely, especially in the evenings when the younger children were asleep and I was still awake. But now you're not lonely anymore, are you?" Louisa asked, her eyes full of compassion. "Now you have me." The simple statement struck Max right in the heart. "Yes," he said quietly, "now I have you." After a month of Saturday outings, the inevitable meeting with Hannah Weber finally took place. Max had cleverly avoided her so far by always bringing Louisa back to Mrs. Kohler before Hannah returned. But on this rainy Saturday afternoon, Hannah came home from work early. When Max and Louisa stormed through the sudden spring rain into Mrs. Kohler's apartment, Hannah was already standing in the kitchen. She was a slim woman with the same hazel eyes as her daughter, her blonde hair tied back in a practical bun. In her simple jeans and worn sweater, she looked exhausted but proud. "Mama," Louisa called excitedly, "we were at Nymphenburg Castle, and I painted a picture of King Ludwig, and Max told me stories about the princesses, and then it rained, and we got all wet." Hannah smiled at her daughter, but her gaze when it fell on Max was cool and suspicious. "You must be Maximilian Berger. Louisa talks about you a lot." "Max, please," he said, holding out his hand to her, suddenly nervous like a schoolboy. "I'm pleased to meet you, Mrs. Weber." "Hannah," she replied automatically, but only took his hand briefly. "Louisa, why don't you go with Mrs. Kohler and change your wet clothes? I'd like to talk to Max for a moment." As soon as Louisa was out of earshot, Hannah turned to him with her arms crossed. "What exactly is your interest in my daughter, Mr. Berger?" The directness of the question surprised him. "It's not what you think," he hastened to say. "Louisa approached me the day before Father's Day. She was so desperate, and I couldn't say no. And now you spend every Saturday with her, out of the goodness of your heart." Hannah's voice was skeptical. Max sighed. "I know how it must look. A strange man who suddenly wants to spend time with her daughter." But the truth is, he hesitated, searching for the right words. "Louisa reminds me of myself. I grew up without parents in a children's home in Schwabing. I know what it's like to feel alone, to be different. And Louisa, she's an extraordinary child, smart, friendly, sensitive. She touched something in me that I had forgotten for a long time." Han looked at him for a long time. Her eyes searched his face for the truth. Finally, she relaxed a little. "Louisa is smiling again," she said quietly. "A month ago, she was still crying when I took her to school. Now she tells her classmates about her outings with her father." She emphasized the last word questioningly. "It was her idea," Max quickly explained, "for Father's Day." "I didn't want to," Hannah interrupted him. "I understand, and I'm grateful that you give her this joy. But do you understand me too? I have to protect my daughter." "Of course," Max nodded. "I completely respect that. If you want me to back off—" "No," Hannah said after a pause. "That would break her heart, but I want to be there, at least sometimes." "Get to know her. I'd like that," Max said sincerely, surprised by his desire to get to know Hannah Weber better. This strong woman who raised such a wonderful child under difficult circumstances. When Louisa returned in dry clothes and with an expectant smile, Hannah and Max looked at each other. Two adults, connected by a child they both loved in different ways. The late hours at Berger Tech Tower were always particularly quiet. Maximilian Berger sat in his office on the 22nd floor, staring at the lights of Munich sparkling below him like a carpet of stars. The analogy brought a smile to his face. Ever since he had met Louisa, he saw stars everywhere. A gentle knock on his door made him look up. It was almost 11 p.m. Most of the employees had long since gone home. He called out, expecting his security chief or perhaps one of the workaholic programmers from the development department. Instead, a cleaning lady entered, one with a cleaning cart and a frightened expression on her face. "Sorry, I didn't know anyone was still here," the woman said hastily. "I'll come back later." Max was about to wave her away and tell her to just do her job when he recognized her. Hannah Weber froze, her hand still on the doorknob. Her eyes widened in realization. "Max, what are you doing here?" "I work here," he replied, equally stunned. "Burger Tech is my company. I'm the CEO. Hannah let go of the doorknob. Her face was a mixture of surprise and sudden understanding. "You're the burger of Burger Tech. I knew you worked in the tech industry, and you clean here?" Max couldn't hide his astonishment. "Since when?" "Almost 3 years." Hannah hesitantly stepped into the office. Her gaze wandered over the luxurious furnishings, the minimalist designer furniture, the artwork on the walls. "I work for the cleaning company Sauber and Company. We're responsible for the night shift in this building." Max was speechless. For 3 years, Hannah Weber had been working in his building, probably cleaning his office every evening, emptying his trash can, cleaning his windows, and he had never noticed her. She had been invisible, part of the anonymous army of workers who kept the shiny world of business running. "I didn't know," he began, unsure of what to say. Hannah smiled weakly. "Of course you didn't know. Why should you? Cleaners are supposed to be invisible. We come in when everyone else has left and leave before the first manager arrives." The truth of her words hit Max like a blow. How many other people like Hannah were there in his building, in his life, whom he had never really seen? "Please sit down," he said, pointing to the elegant visitors' chairs in front of his desk. "If you have a moment." Hannah hesitated, then nodded and sat down. However, she looked out of place in her gray work uniform amid all the luxury. So Max began, unsure where to start. "You've been working here for 3 years every evening, Monday through Friday." "Yes." "And occasionally on weekends for special cleanings." Hannah looked at her worn hands. "It's a good job, better paid than my morning shift at Schulze Partner on Maximilianstrasse." Max quickly calculated that if Hannah worked mornings and evenings, plus occasional weekends, when did she even have time for Louisa? For herself. And Louisa? Who takes care of her when you're working? She's at school in the mornings. In the afternoons, she's with Mrs. Kohler, our neighbor. Mrs. Kohler is a retired teacher and tutors Louisa on the weekends. She paused. A rare smile lit up her tired face. "Well, lately she's been spending Saturdays with you." The realization of Hannah's life, the endless hours of work, the fatigue, the constant worry about her daughter made Max feel ashamed. He, who considered himself so attentive, so clever, and successful, had not even noticed that the mother of the child who had captured his heart had been working in his own building for years. He searched for words. "I'm sorry I never noticed you." She shrugged. "Like I said, it's part of the job. We're not here to be noticed." "But that's wrong," Max said suddenly, passionately. "Every person deserves to be seen, to be respected." Hannah looked at him with renewed interest. "You mean that, don't you?" "Of course," Max leaned forward. "Tell me, what are the working conditions like here?" "Honestly," Hannah hesitated, obviously weighing how open she could be. "There are worse places," she finally said diplomatically. "That's not an answer, please, Hannah. I really want to know." She sighed. "The pay is okay, but we don't have health insurance through the company. No paid time off. The shifts are often longer than advertised, but we only get paid for the agreed hours. Cleaning supplies are sometimes in short supply, and we have to make do with what's there." She looked him straight in the eye. "But that's the way it is everywhere in this industry. We are service providers, outsourced, interchangeable." Max mentally noted every word she said. "And your supervisor, how does he treat you?" "Mr. Krause, he's strict, efficient." Hannah chose her words carefully. "He doesn't tolerate mistakes or delays." Max remembered Klaus Krause, the head of the facility management department, a tall man with a stern face who rarely smiled. He had hardly ever spoken to him. "Thank you for your honesty," Max finally said. "I'll take a close look at all this." Hannah stood up, suddenly concerned. "You're not going to get me in trouble, are you? I need this job." No, of course not, Max quickly assured her. On the contrary, I promise you that things will improve, not only for you, but for all the cleaning staff here. Hannah didn't seem entirely convinced, but she nodded. I really should get back to work now. There are still a lot of offices to clean. Of course. Max stood up as well. And Hannah, thank you for everything you do, not just here, but also for Louisa. She's a wonderful child. A genuine smile appeared on Hannah's face. Yes, she is. After Hannah left, Max stood at his window for a long time, staring out at the city at night. Something had changed in him, a realization that could not be undone. The invisible people who made his success and comfort possible had suddenly been given faces, and one of those faces belonged to someone who had become important to him. The next morning, Max entered his office with a new focus. His assistant, Miss Wagner, was surprised when he asked her to immediately call a meeting with the Human Resources Department, the Chief Financial Officer, and the Head of Facility Management. What is this about, Mr. Berger? She asked as she hastily took notes. A long overdue review of our outsourcing practices, Max replied, especially in the area of cleaning services. The meeting was heated. Klaus Kraus, a man who had worked for Berger Tech for 15 years, didn't understand why the CEO was suddenly interested in the details of cleaning contracts. Mr. Berger, we've selected the cheapest offers, as always, he explained with a frown. That saves the company over 200,000 euros a year compared to the direct employment. And what does it cost the people who work here? Asked Max. The cleaners have no health insurance, no paid vacation days, no job security. That's standard practice in the industry, interjected the CFO. If we start paying more or demanding better conditions, our costs will skyrocket. Max leaned back and looked at the assembled executives. These men and women in expensive suits were deciding the fate of people they had never seen, whose names they did not know. Madabs, effective immediately, all cleaning staff will be employed directly by Berger Tech, he explained calmly, with full health insurance, paid vacation, and reasonable working hours. We will also raise the hourly wage by 30%. The room erupted in protest. This is financial madness. The shareholders will rebel. This is not our responsibility. Max raised his hand and the noise died down. It is precisely our responsibility. These people keep our company running. They deserve respect and dignity. And as for the punt, he smiled thinly, I'm sure we can save the 200,000 euros elsewhere, perhaps in executive bonuses. The CFO turned pale, while the HR manager hid a smile. After the meeting, Miss Wagner came to Max with a list of the cleaning staff. As you requested, Mr. Berger, all names and their current contracts. Max scanned the list until he found the name he was looking for. Hannah Weber, employed by Sauber in Kaufweiss Night Shift, Floors 2022. Miss Wagner, please make sure that Miss Weber is the first to be informed of the changes and arrange flexible working hours for her so that she can spend more time with her daughter. Miss Wagner looked at him curiously. Do you know Miss Weber personally, Mr. Berger? Max thought of Louisa, of her shining eyes, when she talked about stars that are never alone. He thought of Hannah, who juggled 2 jobs and still found time to be a loving mother. Yes, he finally said. She's a friend. 2 days later, Hannah was standing in his office. This time, she wasn't pushing a cleaning cart, but holding an official letter. Are you serious? She asked, her voice wavering between disbelief and hope. A permanent position at Berger Tech with the health insurance and everything. Max nodded. Not just for you, for all the cleaning staff in the building. It was long overdue. Hannah shook her head in disbelief. You did this for me, didn't you? No, Marx replied honestly. I did it because it's the right thing to do. But I might never have realized it if I hadn't met you, if Louisa hadn't made me see the world through different eyes. Hannah stepped to the window and looked out at the city, now glistening in the daylight. You know, she said quietly, when Louisa told me she had asked a stranger to be her father, I was horrified. I thought she'd found a crazy person, a pervert. She turned to him, a smile on her face. Instead, she found the only billionaire in Munich who has a heart. Max laughed. I'm not a billionaire, not yet, but you have a heart, which is rarer. They stood there silently for a moment. The new intimacy between them was still tender and unexplored. Louisa has a school performance next week, Hannah finally said about the solar system. She's playing Jupiter, the largest planet, Max remarked. Yes, she asked me to ask you if you would come as her father. Hannah looked him straight in the eye. I told her I would ask you. Maximilian Berger, the man who 2 months ago had lived his life alone with cool efficiency, felt a warmth in his chest that felt like home. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, he replied. The applause of the parents filled the small auditorium of the elementary school by the English garden. On stage stood children in homemade planet costumes, a little Mercury in silver gray foil, a Venus in shiny gold, a blue Earth with green continents made of felt, and in the middle of it all, Louisa, beaming in her orange-brown costume with the characteristic red spot that Hannah had carefully painted on over the weekend. That's my dad, Louisa suddenly exclaimed, pointing to Max, who was sitting in the front row next to Hannah. He knows everything about planets and stars and helped me learn my lines. A murmur went through the assembled parents, and some turned to take a look at the man whom the shy girl in the back row so proudly referred to as her father. Felix Bauer, standing next to Louisa in his Mars costume, stared open-mouthed. Max felt a warm blush rise to his face, but he smiled and waved to Louisa, whose eyes shone with pride. Next to him, Hannah briefly squeezed his hand, a small gesture of appreciation that sent a surprising tingling sensation through his chest. After the performance, they stood in the schoolyard where refreshments were being served. Louisa, still in her Jupiter costume, ran around among the other children, no longer the outcast girl, but a proud member of a small group. She's changed so much, Henner said quietly as she watched Louisa. 3 months ago, she would never have dared to be so open. Now she shines like a star. Max finished her sentence. Hannah nodded and turned to him. Max, I don't know how I can ever thank you for everything you've done for Louisa, for me. He shook his head. You've done more for me than I've done for you. You've given me something I never had, a feeling of... He hesitated, searching for the right word. Family, Hannah suggested gently. Max nodded, a little embarrassed by the emotion in his voice. Yes, family. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world around them seemed to fade away. Hannah wasn't a conventional beauty, but in that moment, with the soft evening light in her hair and the gentle smile on her lips, Max found her breathtaking. The moment was interrupted when Louisa ran up to them, followed by a small group of children. Dad, can I sleep over at Sophie's tonight? Please, everyone else is allowed to, and we want to watch Planet movies and eat pizza. Now hold on a minute, young lady, Hannah interrupted with a laugh. You know the rules. No spontaneous sleepovers. Louisa's face fell, but, Mom, besides, we have something special planned for today, Max added, winking at Hannah. Remember the thing with the space princesses? Louisa's eyes immediately lit up. Oh yes, the space princesses. She turned to her new friends. I'm sorry, I can't. My dad is telling me stories about space princesses today. They live on a planet far, far away and have magical powers. Max and Hannah exchanged smiles as Louisa enthusiastically told her friends about the fictional princesses. It was a spontaneous invention by Max when Louisa had asked him about his favorite fairy tale. Space princesses. Whispered Hannah as they later held Louisa's hand and left the schoolyard together. I'm curious to hear about it. Me too, Max admitted. I'll improvise. Hannah's small apartment in Newhausen, which Max was entering for the first time, was cramped but cozy. Family photos adorned the walls, and Louisa's drawings and crafts were scattered everywhere. It was a home that spoke of love, not money. After a simple dinner, Max had insisted on ordering pizza. They sat on Louisa's narrow bed while Max made up a story about the Princess of Jupiter, who had adventures with her friends from Venus and Mars. And then Princess Louisa flew with her stardust hang glider straight into the big red spot that everyone thought was dangerous, he said, while Louisa listened with wide eyes. But instead of a storm, she found a secret world full of flying creatures that looked like glowing jellyfish, and she became their friend and protector. Louisa snuggled up to him, her eyes already half closed. And the Queen of Jupiter? Does she have a daddy too? Max swallowed, glancing at Hannah, who was leaning in the doorway listening. Yes, he said gently, the Queen of Jupiter has a daddy who loves her very much. And even though he is far away sometimes, he always thinks of her. Louisa smiled contentedly and drifted off to sleep. Max sat for a moment, gently stroking her hair, then quietly got up. In the small living room, Hannah opened a bottle of wine. "Impressive story," she said, handing him a glass. "You have a talent for it." "Talent or desperation?" Max laughed softly. "I didn't want to disappoint you." They sat down on the worn sofa, a comfortable silence between them. "It's strange," Hannah finally said. "A few months ago, you were a complete stranger. Now I can hardly imagine our life without you." Max looked at her, surprised by her candor. "I feel the same way." They fell silent again, but this time there was a certain tension in the air. Unspoken words, unacknowledged feelings. "Hannah," his cell phone rang, interrupting the moment. Max reluctantly took it out of his pocket, wanting to turn it off, but then paused when he saw the name on the display. Carl Schneider, his CFO. Carl never called, especially not at this hour, unless it was something serious. "Sorry, I have to take this," he said to Hannah and stood up. The news he received made his blood run cold. The financial regulator had launched an investigation into BurgerTech. There were allegations of serious accounting irregularities, allegations that could lead back to him as CEO. When he ended the call, his face was ashen. "Max, what happened?" Hannah stood next to him, concern in her eyes. "There's a problem at the company." "Something serious?" He ran his trembling hands through his hair. "I have to get back to the office right away." "Of course." Hannah nodded understandingly. "Go, see you at the weekend." Max nodded automatically, but his mind was already elsewhere, on balance sheets, audits, and the real possibility of losing everything he had built up. The following days turned into weeks of intense crisis management. Max spent day and night in the office, holding emergency meetings with the board, the auditors, and the lawyers. The investigation had uncovered systematic embezzlement in the finance department. One of his most trusted managers had been siphoning off funds for years, creating fake receipts and manipulating the accounts. Max wasn't directly involved, but as CEO, he bore the responsibility. The press pounced on the story BurgerTech embroiled in fraud scandal. Did Maximilian Berger look the other way? The stock market reacted with a plunge in share prices. In his fight to save his company, Max forgot almost everything else. He canceled his weekly meeting with Louisa. Once, twice, then a third time. Each time, he sent a short message to Hannah. "Sorry, have to work. Tell Louisa I'm sorry." After 3 weeks without visiting Louisa, Max received a message from Hannah that pulled him out of his crisis management tunnel. "Lisa has had a fever for 2 days. The doctors say it's nothing serious, but she hardly speaks and doesn't want to eat. She keeps asking about you. She thinks you've disappeared like her real father. Max, I know you're going through a crisis, but she misses you." The words hit him like a blow. He stared at his phone, reading the message over and over again. How could he have let this happen? How could he have broken a promise he never wanted to break? At that moment, he was sitting in a conference room surrounded by lawyers and advisors discussing damage control strategies. A crucial meeting with the major shareholders was imminent, a meeting that would determine his future as CEO. "Mr. Berger, we need your decision on the press release," his PR advisor urged. Max stood up abruptly. "The meeting is adjourned. I have to go." "Go?" The lawyer stared at him in disbelief. "The shareholders' meeting starts in 20 minutes. Then you'll have to start without me." Max grabbed his jacket, "Or postpone it. I have a more important appointment." He ignored the protesting voices and left the room. As he hurried to the elevator, he dialed Hannah's number. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said as soon as she picked up. "Tell Luis I'm coming." Traffic in Munich was challenging as always, but Max navigated his car with a determination he hadn't felt in weeks. Not for his company, but for something much more important. For a little girl whose trust he was in danger of losing. When he finally stood in front of Hannah's apartment door, his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Hannah opened the door, her face a mixture of relief and reproach. "She's in her room," she said quietly. "She didn't want to go to school today." Max nodded, too guilty to speak. He walked slowly down the short hallway and knocked gently on Luisa's door. "Luisa, it's me, Max." Silence, then a faint, "Daddy." He opened the door. Luisa was lying in her bed, surrounded by stuffed animals, her face pale and her eyes feverishly shiny. When she saw him, her eyes widened. "You came back," she whispered. Max felt his heart break. He sat down carefully on the edge of the bed, unsure if she even wanted him near her anymore. "Of course I came back," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I was gone for so long. I had problems at work." Louisa looked at him, her eyes full of wisdom and forgiveness that no 5-year-old should have. "How big were the problems?" "Very big," Max admitted, "but not as important as you." She reached out her little hand and touched his face. "You look sad." "I'm sad because I missed you," he said honestly, "and because I broke a promise." Louisa sat up. Determination replaced the weariness on her face. "What promise?" "That I would be there for you. That I wouldn't disappear." She thought for a moment, then nodded seriously. "Then you have to make a new promise, an even stronger one." "What kind of promise?" "That you'll always come back. Even if you leave, you'll always come back to me." Max felt tears welling up in his eyes. He, who hadn't cried since his childhood in the orphanage. "I promise you that, Louisa. I'll always come back to you, always." She looked at him searchingly, then nodded as if she had made an important decision. "Okay, then you're my dad forever." Forever. The words lingered in his mind as she wrapped her arms around his neck and snuggled up to him. Over her shoulder, he saw Hannah standing in the doorway, tears in her eyes, but a gentle smile on her lips. In that moment, with Louisa in his arms and Hannah in front of him, Max knew that no matter what happened with Burger Tech, he had found something much more valuable than success or wealth. He had found a family. Autumn colored the trees of the English garden in shades of gold and red as Max and Louisa strolled hand in hand along the leaf-covered paths. The crisis at Bergeratic had not left Max unscathed. Dark circles under his eyes bore witness to sleepless nights, and his face looked slimmer than it had just a few months ago. But there was a peace in his eyes that he had never known before. "I want to show you something," he said to Louisa, leading her to a small bench at the edge of the park. He pulled an official-looking document out of his pocket. "Do you know what this is?" Louisa frowned and tried to decipher the complicated words. "It says your name in Berger Tech." "That's right," Max smiled. "This is a paper that says I'm no longer the boss of Burger Tech." Louisa's eyes widened. "You lost your job, like Mrs. Kohler's son when he was late for work." Max laughed softly. "Not quite. I voluntarily gave up my job. I'm now only on the supervisory board. That means I have to work much less and have much more time." "For me?" Louisa asked hopefully. "For you, for your mother, for us." He gently stroked her hair. "I've been thinking a lot over the last few months, Louisa, about what's really important in life. You know, I used to think that success meant having a lot of money and running a big company. But then a little girl with 2 pigtails came along and asked me if I could be her daddy for a day." Louisa grinned. "That was me." "Exactly. And that little girl showed me that true success is something completely different. It means being there for the people you love. It means keeping promises. It means having a home, not just a house. And now you have a home." Louisa tilted her head. Max nodded. "I'll start building one with you and your mom, if you want me to." They continued walking through the park and past a small toy store. Louisa stopped in front of the shop window, her eyes fixed on a simple brown teddy bear. Not the biggest or most eye-catching one on display, but one sitting a little lonely in the corner. "Do you like that one?" Max asked. Louisa nodded. "He looks like he needs someone to love him." Max smiled at her sensitivity. "Should we go in and get it?" In the store, Louisa immediately grabbed the brown teddy bear and hugged it close. "It's perfect," she said decisively. At the checkout, the salesperson tried to persuade Louisa to choose a newer, more fashionable bear. "This one even has a voice function," he explained, pressing the belly of a glittery bear, which immediately said, "I love you." Louisa shook her head decisively and held on to her simple brown bear. "No, thank you, I want this one. He doesn't have to talk. I know what he would say anyway." "And what would that be?" asked the salesman, amused. Louisa looked up at Max and then back at the bear. He would say, "Thank you for finding me. I've waited a long time." Max swallowed the lump in his throat and paid for the bear, while the salesman looked at Louisa with new respect. With their new companion firmly in their arms, they went to a quiet spot at Klein Hesselo Sea. Max had brought a small picnic basket, and they spread out a blanket and sat down in the fading autumn sun. The lake glistened golden, and the first leaves were slowly falling from the trees. Louisa began to Max as he nervously took a sandwich out of the basket. "I want to ask you something important." She looked at him expectantly, holding the bear close to her. "Do you remember the day you asked me if I could be your dad? Just for one day." Louisa nodded. "For Father's Day." "Exactly. And you know, that was the most important day of my life, because that was the day I got to know you and your mom, and because it taught me what family really means." He took a deep breath. "Now I want to ask you, Louisa Weber, would you like me to be your dad? Not just for a day, but forever." Louisa's eyes grew wide. "Forever and ever, forever and ever," Max confirmed. "I know I'm not your real dad, but yes, you are," Louisa interrupted him with the rock-solid conviction of a child. "A real dad is someone who is there, who tells stories and helps with nightmares and loves you even when you're sad." "That's you." Max felt his heart overflow. "So, it's a year." "Yes," Louisa cried and threw herself into his arms. The bear wedged between them. "Yes, yes, yes, forever and ever and ever." When she let go, she held up the bear. "Bear says yes, too. He wants you to be his daddy, too." Max laughed, tears of joy in his eyes. "Then it's decided. I am now officially Louisa's daddy. And what's the bear's name?" Louisa thought for a moment. "Bruno," she decided. "His name is Bruno." "Louisa and Bruno," Max solemnly added. They sat there silently for a while, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the new feeling of togetherness. Max thought back on the last few months, on the desperate look of a lonely child searching for a father, on the hard work of a single mother, on his own transformation from an isolated workaholic to a family man. The investigation at Burger Tech had turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Although Max had had to step down as CEO to appease shareholders, the thorough investigation had also proven his complete innocence. The embezzlement had been the work of a single manager, without Max's knowledge or involvement. His reputation had been restored, and his position on the board of directors continued to provide him with a comfortable income, but with a fraction of his former workload. "Is Mom happy about it too?" Louisa asked suddenly, as if she could read his mind. "That you're our dad." Max smiled. He and Hannah had had many long conversations over the past few weeks about their past, their hopes, their fears, and the slowly growing feelings between them that went beyond their shared love for Louisa. "I hope so," he replied honestly. "Your mom and I are still getting to know each other, but I like her very much. She's smart and strong and has a big heart, just like you. And she likes you too," Louisa explained with the unshakable certainty of a child. "She always smiles when you come, and now she sometimes wears lipstick when she knows you're coming to visit." Max blushed slightly, but before he could reply, his attention was drawn to a figure standing at the edge of the meadow. Hannah was wearing a simple blue dress, her blonde hair blowing loosely in the autumn wind. She had promised to join the picnic later, when her shift at her new job at Burger Tech was over. She was no longer a cleaner, but an assistant in the Human Resources Department, a job that better suited her organizational skills. "Mom," Louisa called, waving excitedly. "Come quickly." Max asked if he could be our dad forever, and I said yes, and so did Bruno. Hannah approached with a smile and sat down with them on the blanket. "He did?" She looked at Max questioningly, her eyes warm and a little shy. "Forever is a long time." "The best time," he replied quietly and took her hand gently. "If you agree." She squeezed his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I think we could try." Louisa, sensing the tension between the adults, jumped up. "I'm going to feed the ducks with Bruno." She grabbed the bag of breadcrumbs Max had brought and ran to the lakeshore, the bear tucked tightly under her arm. "She's so happy," Hannah said as she watched her daughter. "I haven't seen her glow like this in years. She changed my life," Max confessed. "You both did." Hannah turned to him, her eyes searching his for confirmation. "Are you sure you want this, Max? A single mother with a child? You could have anyone, models, actresses, heiresses." Max shook his head. "I don't want anyone. I want a family. I want to come home and know that someone is waiting for me. I want to watch Louisa grow up. I want to—" He hesitated, then plucked up his courage. I want to get to know you, Hannah, a little bit more every day. She smiled, and in that smile lay all the hope and caution of a woman who had learned to be strong, but was now allowing herself to dream again. That sounds like a good plan. A sudden cry from Louisa made them both look up. Mama Max, come here. Bruno wants a family photo. They laughed and got up, walking hand in hand to the excited girl standing under a golden autumn oak tree. Max took out his cell phone and held it in front of him to capture them all. Louisa in the middle, holding up the bear. Hannah and him at her side, the sky blue and clear above them, the leaves like a golden blanket around them. Rain around them. Say family, Louisa called out. Family, they said in unison, and Max pressed the shutter button, capturing that perfect moment. Not the end of a story, but the beginning of a new one. Later, as he looked at the photo, he added a caption before saving it. Father and daughter of the heart. What does that mean? Louisa asked, looking over his shoulder. It means that families aren't always created by blood, he explained. Sometimes they are created when hearts find each other, when people choose each other. Every day anew, Hannah stepped beside him, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. And that's the strongest kind of family, she said quietly, the one you choose. In the distance, the sun began to set, bathing the sky in warm orange and pink. But Max Berger, who used to see only the next deadline, the next meeting, the next deal, noticed only the golden light in the eyes of the two people who had changed his life forever. And he knew with absolute certainty that he had finally arrived. Not in a house, but in a home. Yes, he said, hugging them both. The strongest kind of family. Our family. Fin the story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Louisa, Max, and Hannah has touched you. To experience more heartwarming stories like this, we have compiled a special playlist with similarly moving narratives. You can find it by clicking on the corresponding link on the left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day, we bring you new and unique stories that explore the complexity of life and human relationships. We look forward to your comments and thoughts on this special family story. Until next time, music.